Welcome to Life Stories. Today, we're sharing a powerful journey of resilience, betrayal, and empowerment. It's a story about Madison, a woman who endured years of emotional and financial abuse at the hands of her manipulative husband, Ethan. After a humiliating public encounter, Madison's world is shaken, but she rises to reclaim her independence and uncover a web of lies that threatens everything. This is a story about finding your voice, standing up for yourself, and discovering the strength to walk away from the toxic things that hold you back. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to begin today's story. I always thought I knew what humiliation felt like. That is, until that evening in the crowded restaurant, when Ethan, my husband, called me ugly in front of his friends and slapped me across the cheek. The sting of his hand was nothing compared to the ache I felt inside. But that wasn't the worst of it. Oh no, the slap, while painful, was only a symptom of something much darker. Something I had been blind to for far too long. My marriage was built on lies, manipulation, and control, a carefully constructed facade that, over the years, had slowly chipped away at who I was. A man who didn't just belittle me in public, but stripped away my independence, my confidence, my voice. I had spent so many years convincing myself that it was just part of the deal. That perhaps I deserved the cruelty. Maybe I wasn't good enough. And maybe, just maybe, it was my fault for not trying harder. For not being the woman Ethan wanted me to be. But that night, in that fancy restaurant, I saw him for who he truly was. It wasn't just the slap. It was the dismissive glance when I arrived. It was the way he barely acknowledged me as I sat down. The way he quickly returned to his conversation with his colleagues, ignoring me like I was invisible. We were at one of those places where the lighting is dim and the air is thick with the scent of expensive wine and truffle oil. A place where appearances matter, where the waiters glide through the room, delivering dishes with a kind of silent grace. I had spent hours getting ready for this night, wanting to make a good impression, wanting to look my best for Ethan. I wore my favorite navy dress, styled my hair carefully, even put on makeup, something I hadn't done in a long time. Tonight was important. Ethan had finally invited me to meet his colleagues, something he had always avoided in the past. But when I walked in, he didn't even stand up to greet me. Instead, he muttered, "Oh, you wore that?" and then laughed. One of his friends. Not me. It wasn't the first time he'd made me feel small. But something about tonight felt different. It felt colder, crueler. I tried to brush it off. Traffic had been a nightmare, I told myself, but the tension in the air was thick. The conversation around the table shifted to work, some project, some deal I knew nothing about. I wasn't included. I was just there, sitting silently, forced to smile tightly as Ethan's colleagues laughed at his jokes. They nodded in agreement when he spoke. And every time I tried to join the conversation, I was either met with dismissive glances or cut off before I could finish my sentence. I felt like a ghost in my own marriage, sitting there, invisible, insignificant. The only time Ethan spoke to me directly was to correct me, to remind me that business works differently, or to laugh at something I said. His voice dripped with condescension, as though I were a child who didn't understand the grown-up world he inhabited. My appetite vanished. I tried to push the discomfort down, telling myself it didn't matter, that this was just a social gathering. But the truth was, it hurt. It hurt so much. But I forced a smile, pretending to be okay. Then came the comments, subtle at first. "You sure you want to eat that much pasta?" one of his friends said with a smirk. "That dress really highlights your curves," another added, his tone laced with mockery. I felt my face burn. The heat spread through my chest as I gritted my teeth, trying to ignore the lump rising in my throat. This wasn't new. Ethan had been doing this for years, making me feel small, insignificant, as if I were nothing more than an accessory to his life. But tonight, it felt different, meaner, more deliberate. It was as if he wanted an audience for his cruelty. And then, he said it, the words that would haunt me forever. "God, you're so ugly when you get upset." The words hit me like a slap before his hand even did. The air in the room seemed to vanish. And for a moment, everything went still. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The world around me seemed to blur. And I felt as though I were drowning in a sea of embarrassment and humiliation. The silence stretched on, thick and suffocating. His friends stared at me. And then at him. And then back at their drinks, pretending like nothing had happened. I was frozen. The sting on my face wasn't the only thing I felt. It was the overwhelming feeling of being seen. Not as a person, but as a thing. A possession to be discarded. I should have stood up. I should have walked out right then. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at Ethan, hoping for some sign of remorse. Some hint that maybe, just maybe, he cared. But all I got was a smirk. His eyes showed no remorse. No regret. Only a cruel, satisfied glint. My heart twisted as I whispered, "Why are you doing this?" I barely recognized the sound of my own voice. So small, so broken. His expression shifted, irritation flashing across his face. As if I were the one embarrassing him. And then, without warning, his hand struck my cheek. It wasn't a hard slap. It didn't knock me off balance. But it stung. The kind of sting that radiated through my skin, settling deep inside my chest. My eyes watered, and my heart felt like it was being squeezed in a vice. But I stayed seated, unable to move, unable to do anything. The restaurant went silent. No one gasped. No one rushed to my defense. The waiter, who had witnessed the entire scene, hesitated before gently placing the check on the table. Ethan leaned back in his chair. As if nothing had happened. He said, "She's being dramatic," laughing lightly as if I were a child throwing a tantrum. I touched my cheek, still burning from his slap. I looked around, searching for anything, anyone who had seen what had just happened. But all I found were averted gazes, uncomfortable shuffling of cutlery, and the quiet clinking of glasses being raised to lips that said nothing. The world didn't just witness my humiliation. It silently agreed with it. No one cared. No one stood up for me. I was completely and utterly alone. In that moment, I realized something I had never fully understood before. This wasn't the first time Ethan had tried to break me. It was just the first time I had seen it for what it truly was. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. A small flicker of recognition. I wasn't crazy. This wasn't my fault. And for the first time in years, I knew I had to leave. I drove home that night in silence. The city lights blurred past my windshield as my hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. The slap still burned on my cheek. But it was nothing compared to the fire building inside me. I could feel it smoldering. Deep in my chest, anger, pain, and something else. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just hurt. I was furious. Furious at Ethan for everything he had done to me over the years. Furious at myself for allowing it to continue for so long. When I got home, I expected to be met with the usual silence. Ethan was probably out with his friends. Laughing, drinking, celebrating his latest victory, humiliating his wife while I sat at home, stewing in my anger. But as I entered the house, something felt different. The silence was suffocating. I kicked off my heels, barely noticing the way they clattered to the floor. My reflection in the hallway mirror caught my eye. I looked like a stranger, my makeup smudged. Mascara streaked down my cheeks. Lipstick smeared. My face was red, not from the makeup but from the sting of Ethan's slap. A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Look at yourself, Madison," I muttered. "Look what you've become." I walked into the kitchen, my hands shaking. I grabbed a bottle of wine, poured myself a glass, and took a long drink, hoping it would numb the ache inside. But it didn't. The alcohol burned as it went down. But it didn't dull the anger that was starting to rise within me. It wasn't just about tonight anymore. It had never been just one night. I thought back to the beginning. To the way Ethan had so smoothly convinced me to hand over control of our finances. "It's just easier this way," he'd said. "You hate dealing with numbers, don't you? Let me handle it. I'm better at this." I had agreed, relieved at the thought of not having to stress over bills and budgets. He took my credit card, telling me it was for emergencies. "Trust me," he said. "I've got this." At first, it felt like a relief. But months later, when I tried to log into our bank account, I found that the password had been changed. "Oh, I updated it," he'd said nonchalantly, sipping his coffee. "I'll send it to you later." But he never did. At first, I didn't think much of it. We were a team, right? Marriage was about trust. But over time, I noticed how dismissive he became whenever I asked about money. "Madison, do you not trust me?" His tone always held a hint of accusation, just enough to make me feel guilty for even asking. Eventually, I stopped asking. I convinced myself it didn't matter. We were building a life together. But I hadn't realized how far he had pushed me out of my own life until it was too late. Then came the comments. They started small, almost playful. "That dress isn't the most flattering on you." But they quickly became sharper. "You looked better when we first met." And eventually, they turned cruel. "You should be grateful I married you." I told myself it didn't matter. That maybe I was being too sensitive. But now, standing in my kitchen, my cheek still burning from his slap, I knew the truth. This was never an accident. Ethan had spent years chipping away at me, little by little, molding me into someone smaller, weaker, someone who wouldn't fight back. I had let him steal my independence. I had let him tear apart my confidence. But tonight he made a mistake. Because he thought I would stay silent. He thought I would wake up tomorrow and pretend like nothing had happened. But for the first time in years, I felt something other than fear. I felt anger, real, burning, unshakable anger. I set the empty wine glass on the counter and exhaled, my hands no longer trembling. I wasn't sure what came next. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let him win. And I was done being afraid. The next morning, I woke up to the soft chime of my phone vibrating against the nightstand. As I reached for it, I had a sinking feeling in my chest. I knew it wasn't Ethan. He was probably still out somewhere with his friends, enjoying his little victory while I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered self-worth. I unlocked my phone, and the screen flooded with messages, texts, emails, missed calls. At first, I thought it was Camille, my best friend, calling to check in on me. But as I scrolled, my stomach dropped. Liar, gold digger, crazy bitch. Messages like these flooded my phone, each one more cruel than the last. Ethan had gone public. He wasn't just fighting back, he was trying to bury me alive. I opened one of the emails from an old mutual friend. Marissa, her words as sharp as a knife. "Madison, I don't know what's happening. But Ethan is telling everyone you're mentally unstable. He's saying you made up the fraud claims. That you've been cheating on him for years. He even said you drained his accounts and tried to frame him." My hands trembled as I read the words. Of course, this was coming. Ethan was losing control, and now he was trying to rewrite the story, to paint himself as the victim. It was predictable. It was pathetic. But what struck me was how desperate he sounded. I had always known Ethan was a master manipulator. But this was something else entirely. He was pulling every string he had left to make me look like the bad guy, to discredit me in front of anyone who would listen. But it wasn't going to work. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just sit here and let him destroy me. I wasn't going to let him get away with this. With any of it. I took a deep breath and called Camille. She answered on the second ring. "Madison, what's going on?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. "His smear campaign has begun," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "He's telling everyone I'm crazy. That I'm making everything up." Camille was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm not surprised. But Madison, this means he's scared. This is his last-ditch effort to make sure you don't destroy him. We need to hit him where it hurts. We need to take everything down, his reputation, his money, his empire." I felt a surge of strength fill me. Camille was right. I had spent too long hiding in the shadows, afraid of his cruelty, afraid of the truth coming out. But now I was ready. I wasn't going to let him control me anymore. That afternoon, I sat at my laptop, my fingers flying across the keys as I went through the bank records, the call logs, everything I had collected over the years. My pulse quickened as I uncovered more and more evidence, money being funneled into accounts under names I didn't recognize. It was all there, plain as day. Ethan's financial fraud, his affair with Nicole Roberts, all the lies he had told. And now I had the proof. I knew what I had to do next. I wasn't going to back down. Not now, not ever. I sent an email to Nicole, the woman Ethan had been seeing behind my back. It wasn't the first time I had heard her name. Ethan had mentioned her once in passing, laughing about some joke she made at work. At the time, I had thought nothing of it. But now, I knew exactly who she was, and what she had been doing with my husband. Nicole didn't answer my first few calls, but on the fourth try, she picked up. "Who the hell is this?" she snapped, her voice groggy and irritated. "Let's not play games, Nicole," I said, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "I know who you are. More importantly, I know what you've been doing with my husband." There was a long silence on the other end before she laughed. A breathy, amused sound. "Oh please, you're the wife, right? The one he..." I cut her off. "You think this is about the affair?" I asked, my tone sharp. "You really think that's the problem here?" There was a pause, and then I hit her with the truth. "I know about the money. The transfers. The ones from Ethan's business accounts that end up in yours." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear her breathing, fast and shallow. Before she spoke, "He said it was fine," she blurted. "He said it was just a temporary fix. He promised me he had it handled." I let out a humorless laugh. "Yeah, and what exactly did he promise you, Nicole? That he'd leave me for you?" Another silence. Then she whispered, "He told me you two weren't really together, that you were just a burden." The words didn't hurt, not anymore. After everything Ethan had put me through, those words didn't have the same power they once did. I had carried his weight for too long, bending and breaking to fit whatever shape he needed me to be. But now I wasn't that woman anymore. "Do you know what I'm going to do next?" I asked, my voice steady. "I'm going to burn his world to the ground." When I hung up the phone, I didn't feel relief. I felt like I was stepping into a new chapter of my life. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting back. And Ethan was going to learn the hard way that I wasn't the same woman he had controlled all these years. As the days passed, the world around me began to shift. Ethan's empire, built on lies and manipulation, started to crumble. I had gathered all the evidence, exposed his fraud, and taken the first steps to make sure he couldn't hurt anyone else the way he had hurt me. The smear campaign he launched against me fell flat as more and more people began to see the truth. Ethan's colleagues, his friends, none of them stood by him when it mattered. And then came the moment I had been waiting for, the legal action. The divorce papers were finalized. The fraud charges were filed. And Ethan's world came crashing down. For the first time in years, I felt free. I wasn't just walking away from a broken marriage, I was walking away from the control, the abuse, and the lies. I was reclaiming my life. It wasn't easy. It was never going to be easy. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had learned that strength wasn't about enduring. It was about knowing when to walk away, when to stand up for yourself, and when to fight back. And that was exactly what I did. As I moved forward with my new life, I realized that true freedom came from letting go of the past and embracing the unknown. The fear of what might come next was nothing compared to the suffocation of staying in a place where I wasn't valued. If you're watching this, wondering if it's too late for you, it's not. You can start over, you can rebuild, and you can find the strength you never knew you had. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. Life isn't just about endings, it's about the powerful new beginnings waiting on the other side.